Elena's fingers clenched around the syringe. In front of her lay the unconscious body of the man who had destroyed her mother. A faint rattle escaped his chest. With a single injection, she could end his suffering, or ease it. No one would ever know which choice she made. The metal medallion resting against her chest felt heavier. It was made from the same material now corroding his lungs. The night nurse's voice tore through her thoughts. "Dr. Espinoza? He's dying." 6 months earlier, Thomas Granger sat at the head of a polished conference table on the top floor of Thornfield Metals. Morning sunlight poured through the panoramic windows behind him, spilling across the city of Toledo, Ohio. He held the quarterly financial report in his hand. The numbers were good. Again. "Our return is 8% above projections," he announced to the board. His voice firm, gaze unwavering. "Production is at maximum capacity." A discreet cough interrupted the moment of triumph. "The union has once again raised concerns about the air quality in the production halls," said Peterson, the head of HR. Thomas suppressed a slight cough rising in his chest. "All readings are within legal limits," he replied firmly. A metallic taste lingered on his tongue, but he ignored it, as he had for weeks. He reached for his glass of water, then froze as his trembling hand caused it to spill over. A small pool formed on the mahogany table. The board members pretended not to notice. "The new filtration systems would delay production by at least 3 days," he continued, "and cost us over $500,000. That's not economically justifiable." Back in his office, a stack of reports awaited him. On top sat a particularly thick file titled Workplace Contamination Analysis, Hall B. Maria Espinoza. Again. The petite woman from quality control who had worked at his plant for 20 years and never kept her mouth shut. Thomas skimmed the first page. Self-conducted air tests, photos of inadequate protective gear, a detailed list of illnesses over the past 5 years. He squinted. This kind of activism could cause unrest. With a decisive motion, he scribbled his initials in the corner and tossed the report into the shredder next to his desk. 3 weeks later, Peterson entered his office looking tense. "Maria Espinoza hasn't shown up for 5 days. Diagnosis: acute bronchitis with suspected pulmonary fibrosis." Thomas barely looked up from his monitor. "These people are replaceable. We're not running a charity here." The dismissal was handled discreetly. No severance, no medical assistance. The next time Thomas walked through the production hall, the workers fell silent. Their bodies stiffened, their eyes dropped to the floor. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon. Thomas stood before a dozen potential investors. The presentation was running smoothly. The numbers looked great. The profit forecasts promising. "Our outlook is—" The words caught in his throat. Suddenly, his lungs burned, as if molten metal had been poured into them. He gasped for air. The investors' faces blurred. His legs gave out, and the world went black. When he came to, he was in a hospital bed, a sterile room, the muted sounds of medical machines in the background. A young doctor with a clipboard stepped up to him. "Mr. Granger, you have acute heavy metal poisoning. Several metals, mostly cadmium and beryllium, have accumulated in your tissue." Thomas stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. I don't work on the production floor." "Your drinking water shows significant contamination. The metals seeped into your home's water supply from the soil beneath your factory." After 3 days of failed treatment, he was transferred to a specialized environmental medicine facility. There, he would meet Dr. Elena Espinoza. As Thomas skimmed his patient chart, his eyes stopped at the name Espinoza. His fingers instinctively gripped the armrest. He'd heard that name before, but couldn't place it. Dr. Espinoza was in her early 30s, with a precise and reserved demeanor. She checked his vitals with practiced efficiency, but when she touched his fingertips, she hesitated for a fraction of a second. She avoided direct eye contact and answered his questions curtly. "Sometimes you only see the truth when it's inside you," she said while listening to his lungs. A muscle twitched in her jaw. The body doesn't lie, it stores everything we force upon it. Thomas noticed a medallion around her neck, a roughly shaped disc of dull gray metal. When he asked what it was, she said only, "A reminder." It was strange how she used terms that aligned with industrial processes, speaking of deposits and filter failures, as though describing a factory rather than a human body. One night, on his way to the restroom, Thomas overheard Elena speaking on the phone in the nurse's station. "Yes, Mama, he's responding to the treatment. No, he hasn't recognized me. Yes, I know. Justice takes time." Thomas's condition worsened despite treatment. On a particularly bad night, he woke up gasping, unable to draw enough air into his lungs. He reached for the emergency button, but his strength failed him. He slipped from the bed and collapsed on the cold floor. The panic that gripped him mirrored exactly what he had ignored during Maria's first sick leave, the same helplessness, the same suffocating fight. When his condition stabilized, he was allowed to sit in the clinic's common room. He was flipping through a magazine when a wheezing sound came from the doorway. An older man was wheeled in, wearing an oxygen mask. His sunken cheeks bore witness to years of illness. "Granger?" The name came out in a raspy croak. "Thomas Granger." The man pointed at his oxygen tank and held up a newspaper article. The headline read, "Environmental Scandal at Thornfield Metals." "This man poisoned all of us," the accusing voice rang through the suddenly silent room. "I worked in his factory for 20 years. This is the result." All eyes turned to Thomas. Several patients began to murmur. One stood up and deliberately turned away. At that moment, Elena entered. She grabbed the handles of Thomas's wheelchair and led him out, while the man's accusations echoed behind them. "Do you know him?" Thomas asked once they were out of earshot. "Walter Jennings, welder in your plant from 1998 to 2018. Diagnosis, berylliosis, irreversible lung damage." Elena's voice was clinical. One of 24 cases in the past 5 years. Days later, Thomas noticed a framed photo on Elena's desk as she studied his file. A middle-aged woman in protective gear, smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Beside it lay a worn respirator mask with the initials ME scratched into it, modified by hand with extra filters and seals. "That woman, is she family?" he asked quietly. Elena looked up, her eyes suddenly sharp and clear. "She was your employee. You fired her when she got sick." Thomas felt his stomach lurch. Sweat beaded on his forehead. A bitter taste rose in his throat, and he couldn't stop it. He leaned over and vomited onto the floor. He couldn't meet Elena's gaze. When he could finally speak, he instinctively tried to deflect blame. The safety reports weren't clear enough. He muttered, "We stayed within legal limits." Elena said nothing. Then she opened a drawer and placed a folder in front of him. It was a copy of Maria's report, with his own initials in the corner, unmistakable. "My mother worked herself sick so I could become a doctor," Elena said quietly. "And now I'm here, saving you." The weight of her words hit harder than any physical blow. In his desperation, Thomas grasped for the only thing he knew. "I could make a donation to the clinic, or to you personally, whatever you need." Elena's fingers tightened, her gaze turning cold. "This isn't about money, Mr. Granger. it's about responsibility. The realization didn't strike like lightning. It came like a rising tide. Slowly, Thomas accepted the physical reality of his illness. During one exam, he caught a glimpse of his own X-rays. The white spots on his lungs, identical to those Maria had shown in her report. Doctors told him he would likely suffer from reduced lung function for the rest of his life. A constant physical reminder of what he had done to others. Upon discharge, he didn't go home or to the office. He drove to a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. Elena had given him Maria Espinoza's address. His knock went unanswered. He tried again, louder. "I know you're in there, Mrs. Espinoza," he called through the closed door. "Please, I just want to talk." "There are things you can never make right," came the voice from inside. "Go away." He returned the next day, and the day after that. On the third visit, the door opened a crack. Maria's face was gaunt, her skin pale. A nasal oxygen tube fed her lungs. Thomas fought back tears as she regarded him coolly. "What do you want?" she finally asked. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Not pity," he said. "Dignity, justice, not just for you." The following Monday, Thomas Granger didn't show up in his top-floor office. Instead, he reported to HR, put on a blue work suit, and went down to the production floor. For a week, he worked at the welding stations, the most dangerous job, with the highest exposure to metals. His muscles ached. His hands cracked open. After 12-hour shifts, he could barely stand. His lungs burned. He experienced what he had only read about in reports: the deafening noise that made communication impossible, the stagnant air when the fans failed, and the heat became unbearable. When he invited the workers to a meeting at week's end, no one came. One foreman told him flatly, "Why would we believe you now?" Thomas understood. Trust had to be earned. He rescheduled the meeting and kept working in the meantime. The investments in new safety measures cost millions. Thomas pushed them through anyway. New air filtration systems were installed. Old fans were replaced, ventilation redesigned. High-quality respirators distributed to every worker. For every sick employee who had been dismissed, he found a solution. Some were rehired in modified roles. Others received financial support for medical treatment. The workers responded with open skepticism. On his first walk through after the changes, they avoided his eyes and fell silent when he approached. But over time, things shifted. The worker's posture when he entered changed, from fear to cautious nods, then to open gestures. One day, a worker who used to avoid him offered him a coffee. Maria, though still severely ill, eventually accepted Thomas's offer to return as a part-time workplace safety consultant. "Why should I help you?" she had asked. Thomas's reply was simple: "Not me. The ones still working here." She agreed, on her terms, limited hours, full autonomy, direct reporting to the board. Her first directive, weekly air quality testing, results publicly displayed in the lobby. 6 months after his collapse, Thomas led a company-wide assembly. When he reached for the water glass on the podium, he noticed his hand was steady, a quiet contrast to the trembling glass at the start. "People are not replaceable," he told the assembled staff. "They are what keep us alive." In the back of the room, he saw Maria listening. Her face didn't show full forgiveness, perhaps it never would, but there was a quiet acknowledgement of change. Standing beside her was Elena. Thomas took a deep breath. The air in the factory tasted different now, cleaner, clearer, like change. The tremor in his hand would return in times of stress, a lasting legacy of his poisoning. But it was also a reminder, a warning never to repeat the same mistakes. He would listen,